Hello, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of AIGA's Design and Business Conference. Thank you for joining us. Before we begin our fireside chat, a few housekeeping notes. Closed captions are available through Zoom and may be turned on or off according to your preference. There's a button at the bottom of your screen that will allow you to adjust the settings. Please remember that all AIGA events follow our code of conduct. This session is being recorded and will be available for viewing post-event. We're also live streaming to our followers on Facebook and LinkedIn. Please connect with us and share your experiences on social media. The hashtag for this event is AIGA Design. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome Bennie Johnson, AIGA's Executive Director. Today's guest, Scott Belsky, Chief Product Officer, Executive Vice President, Creative Cloud at Adobe. Bennie?
Welcome, everyone, to our AIGA Fireside Chat today. Conversations with business leaders with a digital spark. I'm really delighted and honored today for our fireside guests. I've been looking forward to this for weeks to spend time with Adobe's Chief Product Officer, Scott Belsky. Builder, creator, author, and product obsessive. This is really great. I get to start today calling somebody obsessive in a positive way. So I'd like to welcome you, Scott. It's great to have
Thanks,
you.
Thanks, Bennie. No, it's wonderful to be with you.
Yeah, one of the things that I've really been drawn to is you talk often about being an advocate for technology and community to really empower creatives and business to be amplified and engage and do more. My first question is really, what initially drew you into creativity and business? How did you start thinking about that kind of nexus?
I mean, I think most of my inspiration has always come from frustration, and is in this case, I think that the creative world is really what makes life meaningful to us. It's design that helps us understand the world around us as it happens, make sense of whether it be issues related to health or policy or whatever else. Creativity is what compels us to take action on things. Creativity is what moves us to tears, what moves us to laughter, if you really think about it. And yet, the creative world is probably the most disorganized community on the planet. These are people who, sometimes actually wear disorganization as a badge of honor, as if it's kind of part of the magical mix of where their ideas come from. And I just don't agree with that. I actually think that the most prolific creative individuals and teams in the world are actually, quite productive and consider themselves as businesses as much as they consider themselves as creatives. And so I've always found it interesting to push those norms. I feel like the creative people I know, the last thing they need is more creativity. What they need is more organization and practices to scale their efforts and impact. And so that's always been my interest.
It's really interesting that you bring that out. We just released our first AIGA design point of view industry research, and we wanted to be really ambitious and think about the ins and outs of our industry. And one of the key highlights I was going to talk about later in our conversation, but you really kind of jumped into it, was that we saw that eventually all creatives, all designers are businesses. Mm-hmm. And in a way, this was really powerful in the past year. When I first started AIGA, we went right into the pandemic, and there were tons of resources that were available for small businesses. And one of the insights I had at that moment is many in our community didn't really view ourselves as businesses, right? We would use other language, creative studios, creative practices, but ultimately the resources that were needed and available were described under the practice, which is running a small business.
Yeah.
And we were seeing that whether you're a chief design officer or starting off, there are points in times where you're going to maintain a practice, and there's value in that and strengthening your skills in that space. So I'd love to talk about kind of business and start. I'm going to take you back a bit. I was thinking about this conversation, and it's hard to believe it's been 15 years since you started Behance. Let me give you a moment to let that sink in, that it's been 15 years.
I feel old.
That's not my point. I want to talk about that moment because I'd like to bring you back to that time. As you think about starting Behance. And our conversations we've been having this week with our design and business conference, we've talked a lot about designers' power in solving problems. But we've been refining it a bit to talk about the driving problems or the core problems. And that's a part of an entrepreneurial set. So I think back to Behance. What was the driving problem that you and your partners were looking to solve 15 years ago when you started Behance?
Yeah, well, I think one of the real insights, again, born from frustration, was just how disorganized our friends' careers were.
Right.
I studied a bunch of design in college. My co-founder Matthias was a graphic designer by background, and a lot of the people that we knew really lived their careers at the mercy of circumstance. They relied on clients to get them more clients only. They would put up their own portfolio site on their own domain name somewhere, but
Right.
the people that would go to it were people they already knew. So they were kind of preaching to the choir and not really efficiently networking. And their portfolio sites, frankly, were always out of date. And it was interesting. We had a fateful focus group in the very early days, Benny, and we had a bunch of bottles of wine and some cheese, and invited designers that we knew and really respected over.
Now you call this a focus group, right? Is that a technical term? Okay, I got it.
We had to get people in the door.
Right. Wonderful.
And we kind of described what we envisioned for Behance as this professional, somewhat social network, where people could showcase their work and connect with each other. And universally, everyone thought that was a horrible idea. People said, well, we've got DeviantArt, we've got MySpace, we've got Facebook, we've got LinkedIn. Like, the last thing I need is another place to keep my profile updated. Like, what a bad idea. And we said, oh, wow, like this is not going well. So we poured some more wine. And then we asked a question around, what are you struggling with? Mm-hmm. And the list, it was like a long list, right? People just we were writing things up on the wall. I never get attribution for my work. An agency always takes the credit. I never get a chance to update my portfolio site. And when I do, no one really actually sees it other than the people I already know. And the list goes on and on and on. It was one of those real moments where I was like, wow, so we cannot build what the customer is saying that they want. We must build what the customer is saying that they need. And so we deconstructed the whole notion of a portfolio site so that these projects that ladder up to a portfolio actually live in the ether across so many different sorts and discovery paths, and that ultimately people's work is the lead generation for their portfolio, which was the inversion of a traditional portfolio site. So that's really where it all came from.
And moving from there, it's been 15 years since Behance started, but 10 years since you transitioned into the broader Adobe product family. As an entrepreneur, you've had a chance to have this growth. And I always kind of jokingly say, once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. So even in your capacity now, you've been with Adobe off and on over the past 10 years. And from that, for everyone who's mentioning, Scott had a chance to be a founder of a company that he sold into a larger company, work there, then take some time away and do some other ventures that we'll talk about later, and then come back. I'd love to hear, your thoughts on that trajectory. And as the entrepreneur moving through those different spaces, what have you learned about yourself and the creative business during that time?
Yeah, well, as one of my mentors, Seth Godin likes to say, you have to always create ruckus. And I feel like entrepreneurs are ruckus causers in their industries, or at least they try to be. And I think that that part hasn't left me. Right. I've now been at the helm of Creative Cloud, all of our products, for the last 3 years or so, 3.5 years. And we are, we're causing ruckus. Of course, it takes a few years for ruckus to manifest itself and to see the light of day. So stay tuned on that front. But for me, I thought I was a serial entrepreneur, right, in the early days. And then I realized I was more of a mission-driven entrepreneur. I liked solving a particular problem in a space I loved, as opposed to the idea of starting over again, which to me is somewhat masochistic. It's like, oh my goodness, like the idea of going back to the 0 to 1 over and over and over again is kind of makes my stomach churn. What I love doing is, over the course of a lot of time, like really making a dent, really making a mark, and doing something for a customer base that I feel really close with and, identify with personally. So, you always want to kind of be creating for yourself to some extent when you're crafting a product, if you can. And I also enjoy that. So that is why I kind of went through that, that's the short version. But, I do think that these days, with the rise of the creator economy, which we can talk about, and the role, I mean, as much as we get excited about technology, let's not fool ourselves. It's the user's experience of the technology that matters more than the technology. And to me, that's the opportunity for design.
I think it really is. One of the things that I enjoy, and we follow each other, and I get a chance to sometime have notes that pop up in my feed. And this is one that popped up for me that I've been saving for you. So I think you know the person who wrote it, Scott Belsky. And it's popped up one day and it just said, the best designers I've ever worked with go rogue at least 10% of the time in every project. And you don't stop there. And you go on to say, and that's how the product ends up being better than anyone expected. So kind of, I'm going to invite you to expand on that a bit more for our audience.
I got a lot of blowback for that because people said 10%. I'm like, guys, I said at least 10%. So, everyone can take their part of the spectrum there in terms of what percentage they like to go rogue. But I do believe that, the best designers I have ever worked with, take what I think I'm asking for and then come back and show me I was at least partly, if not mostly, wrong.
Right.
Because they went through the process of exploring, the full landscape of possibility. And I may have been walking up the wrong hill, and then they found the mountain. So what does that require? It requires first of all, a dynamic or a power structure, if you will, within a team or company where designers not only have a seat at the table, which is cliche at this point, but also have a disproportionate influence over strategy and allowance of time and space to explore the full range of possibility, and the respect of the team to come back and suggest something different than what was asked of them. And so that's and when you work with people, a lot of people we work with just do what they're told, and that's not advancing the agenda. That's literally just staying within the same ballpark.
Right. And it's interesting. We're spending time now and over the past year, and we continue to dig into that cliche of the seat at the table, because often people say it and they stop right there, which really doesn't give you the insight as to how executive decisions get made at both the macro corporate level or the project level in space. One of the things that I find really interesting in your role now at Adobe is you manage really 3 distinct groups, from product and engineering and design. What have you seen and learned from that kind of vantage point of how best that designers can influence and collaborate with their peers and colleagues across those functions? It's something that we hear a lot. How do I have a presence there? How do I have an outpaced impact?
Yeah, well, it's and I'm always tinkering. It's a big organization, and there's a lot of legacy, and of course, every team within that organization is different, right? But I believe a few things deeply. One of them is this notion of a prototype being worth 100 meetings is so true. And it also doesn't only apply to product design. It also applies to any conversation you're having. If you're talking about the business model or a marketing experience, or an end-to-end experience of a customer when they're managing their account settings, whatever the case may be, you have all these people chiming in with their experiences and their opinions and debating facts and metrics, et cetera. But when you just go through the actual experience and what it can be together, it's the hot knife through the butter of bureaucracy. People just suddenly get aligned, and it saves meetings and a lot of miscommunications. And so I think that the role of a designer in organizations that I manage is to help them set the bit first, right? Is to get that prototype up as soon as possible. Again, give the space and the resources to have it be developed, and then get everyone on the same page as soon as possible. Back in the Behance days, we used to have a process called concepting, which was the first part of our product development process. And it was product and designers only in the room in an iterative set of meetings, right, where we would just spend hours together every week going through the experience and then feedback, and then again the next week and again the next week. And only when we felt like this was the right experience, the product experience, would we then hand off and hand the power over to the engineering team. And that was the moment where they could then reject anything we had done and send it back into concepting. But I purposely kind of kept these, processes separate, because engineers are focused on cost and performance and efficiency and everything. Oh, that's going to be expensive. That's going to take time. And that interferes, of course, with like the visioning process in the earlier stage.
So I'm going to change pace for a second, because, I always like to have the conversation about leadership as well. And one of the things that's been interesting, you've been an entrepreneurial leader, you've been an intrapreneurial leader within organizations, but you've also been a volunteer leader. And Scott and I share something in common. We found out recently. We both serve as board members within the larger Smithsonian institution. I served for the Anacostia Community Museum, and Scott is on the board of Cooper Hewitt. I'd love to hear how volunteer service and leadership has impacted your stance on leadership and made you a better leader.
Well, I think we should talk about it in two perspectives. One, which is what you're doing for the community you're within, and also what you're personally getting out of it. Because I actually think that it's leadership development. It's, and I look at all the AIGA events that I've attended over the years, and the people I have known that are involved in various levels of leadership, AIGA wise around the country, and this is oftentimes one of like their cardinal leadership development experiences, where you get to, you solve problems and you operate at a level that makes you more effective in every other part of your life. So there's that kind of somewhat, selfish or career oriented, benefit, which goes without saying. But I'll tell you, I attended my first Cooper Hewitt board meeting 10 years ago or something like that. And I was really excited. This is our nation's design museum. Right. And I was like, wow, this is cool. And the meeting, was extraordinarily slow for my taste. I'm used to a startup environment, decisiveness, actions, divide and conquer, have the meeting be as short as possible. And this was more of a, let's go through each exhibition. Let's talk about this. I walked out of that meeting, and one of the people that was on the board with me at the time, and is still on the board, is John Maeda, who probably many of you know, and was president of Rhode Island School of Design at one point. Before that, at the MIT Media Lab, and has had an interesting career ever since, and a great design mind. And so I went up to him and I was like, John, like, gosh, what a waste of time that was. Like, nothing happened. Like, we didn't make any decisions. And he looked at me, in this sort of Yoda-like way, shaking his head at the young Padawan and being like, oh, Scott, all these little startups you get so excited about, they won't be around in 100 years. They may not be around in 10 years. But every now and then in life, you get the opportunity to add a brick. And that's why you're here. You are here to find your brick to add to an institution that will well outlast anything else you're probably ever involved with. And it really struck with me. I was like, wow, so the purpose is really to, be the sounding board and everything else, but find some way, whether it's through my, my day role with Adobe, or like some other relationship I have, or something I can add value to, whether it's the digital experience or whatever, and try to add that brick. And so I've started to approach the volunteering side of my life with a different level of expectation and aggressiveness. Sometimes your objective there is a little different when it comes to the community and making an impact on the world in that way.
It really is. That's a powerful metaphor to kind of add the brick. You think of it as that dynamic stewardship. Yeah. In the space of it, where you're helping to infuse new ideas, but you also have this responsibility to help kind of make the space and to leave it better than you found it, and to grow forward and understand and respect what's come before, what's happening now, and how you can impact what happens in the future.
Well said.
So it's, one of the things that I love in our conversations is thinking about the things that you explore and you've been writing about. Almost a year to today, actually, you wrote a piece about crisis unlocking productivity.
Hmm.
I was surprised when I looked back. I was like, it's actually been a year. And you were writing this from a vantage point of 2 months, 2.5 months into our pandemic. So the wonderful thing about writing is we get a chance to put a stake in the ground, and then we get to look back and smile at ourselves a year later or 2 years later. So I'm going to give you that opportunity to smile back. But I'm curious, you made some great points about this moment of crisis and how it could unleash productivity that we had latent. As we take a year on to those 2 months, 14 months into there, what do you think today about this opportunity that the last year and a half has created for us? What do you think about that in terms of our productivity in the world?
I mean, that first of all, that was me trying to desperately find the silver lining in a
Right.
absolute crazy time, both within my teams, in my life, and in the world. The thing that I did start to realize was that we've had modern practices for remote work. We've had these new tools like the Slacks of the world, and cloud services for collaboration, et cetera. We've had these things for years.
Right.
But our teams haven't gotten the full benefit of them because there were always the holdouts, the people who just preferred to still do things over email or needed to still be in person for certain things. And they became in some ways like the lowest common denominators of our team's productivity because we couldn't, we always had to accommodate them. And we didn't, and because we wanted to be like, collegial, et cetera. And then this pandemic happened, and the forcing function of everyone suddenly having to adopt the things that they were always sort of reticent to really, adopt and modernize themselves with, that happened like instantaneously.
Right.
And what ended up happening is that there was all this kind of new productivity that was kind of gained but never fully realized. And then suddenly like that gap between the gain and the realization like suddenly closed, and like all this productivity was suddenly realized. And I think suddenly real organizations, I think a lot of us feel burnt out to some degree because we've been so hyper productive because all of the kind of the friction of the system kind of went away to some degree. And now we're like, whoa, like this is not scalable from a humanity perspective. So, but it is exciting that we've unlocked it, right? And now we have to be stewards of our own energy and our own sanctity of mind and decide how productive we actually really want to be. But that was like the key realization for me then.
Right. I mean, I really respect the conversation, and it was empowering to read it then and then look back now to kind of boldly say, hey, we are unleashing this. I think about in our own lives, how many things that we could hear our 2017 selves and our 2018 saying we cannot do, it isn't possible to do. And then watching as we not only did it, we did it with creativity, we did it with consideration, concern, and empathy. We did it with all these ways that we didn't think were possible before. But it does shape kind of a space right now. Is the things that we're doing, are they sustainable, right, to our space? So I wouldn't ask you to look back a year without asking you to look forward, right? But I'll give you a shorter horizon. But if you look 6 months out from today, what are the things that you think our new reality is creating both challenges and opportunities?
Bennie, that's a good one. And I think we could have a discussion on a number of elements in terms of what that future holds. I do think that do you remember the whole quantified self movement it started maybe 10, 15 years ago, and it was people just kind of chronicling geeky aspects of themselves, how much they consumed, how many steps they took, how many hours they slept, how many this, how many that. And now, we all have these like Apple Watches and different things, some people take it to different levels of glucose monitoring and sleep monitoring, et cetera. And I think, I do think this last couple of years, because we, all of our lives to some extent became a little bit more localized and a little bit more, we started to understand our inputs and outputs a little bit better, or the lack thereof. I mean, for me, like I'm desperate to travel again because that was sort of an input that I never really appreciated from a creative perspective, and now like seeing these four walls over and over and over, right? It's like at some point you need more inputs. But I think that, so what I think over the next few years, first of all, I think, that notion of the roaring 20s coming back, I do buy that. I think that we will more deeply appreciate the role of travel and other people and meeting people, even an introvert such as myself, because it's like, these are inputs we kind of desperately need to some extent. And, then I also think we're going to start to just not work as hard as we possibly can just for the sake of it. I think we've all kind of recognized we can now unleash so much productivity for ourselves. Let's be more purposeful in our time. I was talking recently to the CEO and founder of Calendly, which is just like such a cool product. And, we were talking and what we were talking about was like, what if you could actually really get a bar graph of your time every week? Like you really knew how every meeting was allocated in your calendar. Is it, how many hours are you spending with members versus on responsibilities like fundraising versus management versus employee feedback versus personal things versus creative things. And if you saw a report every week, would you be satisfied with that? Or would you say, wait, that doesn't map with what I should be doing? I think that stuff is going to become much more popularized for all of us.
Interesting. So kind of thinking future as well, you've talked a lot about the future of work. And I'm curious in these discussions, we're having them all the time as well. Like, what does the future of work look like for creatives, for designers, for design adjacent business leaders? And how do we make that a more intentioned future? And you started to kind of speak about that of determining what we do with our productivity. But there's no question that our world has changed, is changing, and continues to change at a faster clip. What are your thoughts on what that future will look like for creatives?
Well, I would start with the fact that we used to think we needed to be associated with a shingle and have a back office in order to have a great career as a creative. And that need is no longer there. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't want to be a part of firms and agencies, but we can be more purposeful in like why we are doing that. And we can be a little bit more assertive in, are we getting what we want for our careers out of this experience or not? Because if you're not, there's, welcome to the soloist economy. You can get everything you need from, this company Collective Fin for incorporating yourself to, all the companies that do billing and payments. You can, there's so many ways you can market yourself. You can literally have all of the back office functions of a big agency for a series of, monthly SaaS fees, right?
Right.
And then you're off to the races on your own, and you really own your audience, and you own your brand, and you own your time. And so that actually raises the bar for what an agency and firm needs to provide for us if we're going to work, and associate ourselves with a company as opposed to be an independent soloist. So I think that's out of the starting gate. That's like a big difference, and that will continue to be more true. The future of the economy is the soloist economy, in my view. And engaging people on their own terms. Of course, we also should be able to work wherever we work, of course. But that opens up a very interesting problem to solve around career development. Right. How do you make sure you're known, amongst your colleagues? How do you get opportunity? What's the new version of FaceTime? There are a few companies out there that are now doing, I like to call it spontaneity as a service. You log into something every day where you just kind of bump into people and have audio chats, with little avatars in a website. We need new ways of also like having some of those moments and spontaneity for career development and idea exchange, et cetera, that we will lose if we all insist on just kind of working remotely on our own. So those are a few of the opportunities and challenges I think we're going to have to figure out.
Yeah, I think to your point, there's opportunities in upskilling and diversity of skill and portfolio, because you're right, if you're working on your own, then often you can block yourself off of other opportunities because of the nature of the business that you're working in, kind of this open space. And likewise, the trade-off, if you're working with a larger shingle, the ability to pivot in space, it creates an entirely new way of thinking about a dynamic career, one that's sustainable and productive. So, it comes back to, it all comes back to our conversations about, being a creative entrepreneur. We really, the theme and throughput of our discussion has really talked about those points and those drivers of thinking about what's next and how do we build. When you think about your time as an entrepreneur, like I'm running my creative practice and I'm transitioning from my idea to reality and then back to reality to the ideas. There's something that you've written about this dimension of looking at joy in time, being involved in the space. And I found that kind of really interesting to think about that. So I've made this commitment, I have an entrepreneurial space in there, and now I'm going through this space and trying to balance my joy in time. Could you speak a little bit about that? It's a really kind of cool idea.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what I was thinking when I was about that. Maybe one of my all-night benders thinking
Hey.
about the real journey, but it's well, I would put it this way. What I've learned about myself is that I'm most happy when I feel fully utilized.
Right.
And and some of the career mistakes that I've made, like for example, leaving the world of building and designing to become a full-time venture capital investor. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking, because immediately I felt like I had hung up my spurs. It was sort of like all of the skills that I loved putting to use were suddenly like atrophying, and I learned a few valuable lessons there. Like one is, don't, just because everyone says you should be doing something doesn't mean you should be doing that thing. And then the second thing is, maybe along the grass is greener thing. A lot of us, we probably complain about our clients or about the anxiety of building and managing teams and shipping products and all this stuff. And you say to yourself, oh, if I could just get on the other side of that and have that as my past chapter. And then like 3 weeks in, I missed it. And I just recognized like that tension was actually something that put me to use. Right. And so I'm most happy when I feel fully utilized, both professionally and personally. And so I've started to really just think about my time as it relates to, whether it's with my children or my spouse or my this or my, like all the things that are trying to like, leverage those muscles. So joy in time. Well, I think that you certainly have like a very volatile process, over the course of building something. But I don't know, maybe you tell me if there's another direction you wanted to go.
No, that's it. I came across that in the conversation. I just thought that was a nice thing to share with our audience, because we're all making those kind of trade-offs and thinking about it. And I love the candor of talking about making those steps. You're doing the next best, expected move, right? But that's not always the right thing. It's not always the generative thing, and it's not always the authentic, soul enriching thing, right? But we get into a space where this is the next thing that we should do. And I appreciate you sharing that out to say, hey, I did this. It sounds like a good press release, right? But it's not true to really Scott Belsky.
Yeah, I agree. And, I look back and I think, gosh, I've always tried to take every opportunity, right? Because just, it always seemed like, oh my gosh, so lucky I get to work with this person. I get this opportunity. And all of us, like, we want to make the most of every opportunity presented to us and appreciate them fully. And at the same time, maybe, as we mature, we have to make sure we, are grounded in like what our values are and like what really fulfills and utilizes us, because that's not only good for us, it's also good for the world, right? And it's good for the people around us. And so maybe that's something we can all challenge ourselves to do.
So I'm going to ask a wonderful advice question. As you've had a chance to serve as a leader in your own shop, a leader within a program, and then a leader of a large enterprise, what advice do you have to my design plus business audience today as they go through their journeys? So what are the things that you think that they should hold true as they think about what's next for them?
Well, you all have a superpower that is really I mean, competitive advantage, we already know design is a competitive advantage for most businesses, but as the ability to show as opposed to tell, the ability to make that prototype that is worth, countless meetings. And so first of all, you need to be working in an environment where that superpower is both nourished and appreciated. And it is scary to always make a change, but if you don't feel like your capacity is being fully utilized and that your learning curve is steep, like you owe it to yourself as well as your colleagues and the future colleagues you might be able to work with who would leverage that part of you, to try to take a risk in that regard. I also, I think I think that it's really helpful to write and to contribute content in the community. To me, sharing is the new networking. Right. Whereas we used to go to these receptions and try to hand business cards out and go to meet like the senior people or try to get connections, like that's old news, right? Now it's about, if you're a designer, sharing assets, sharing your Creative Cloud libraries with other people, sharing your PSDs and, and network, building a network with people that are more junior than you, that are peers. Having this collective mentality, is really, in my view, what is fueling, the future of collaborations and thus the future of careers. And so sharing is the new networking, sharing your writing, like your ideas, put yourself out there. I think that we should all be curators of what's interesting to us and narrators of the stories that we're involved with. And then other people who tune in are going to be there when we need them to help connect the dots for us, to help them find some talent that will help us, as we build our teams, etc. So those are a few things, but the future of the designer is bright, and we just all have to recognize, how much great stuff we can do.
That is the most perfect way to end our conversation today. I think the future of the designer is bright. In the way we're going. Scott, I cannot thank you enough for spending this time this morning with us and still, as we quoted, still helping creative people, teams, and networks make ideas happen and make the world better. You have been kind of a living embodiment of what we push on the AIGA mission, which is design as a creative and professional craft, thinking of design as strategic advantage. And as we've talked today, and I think what's really powerful for our audience to get a chance to hear you talk about your journey as a leader and the work that you do having an impact as a positive catalyst for the world around you. I thank you very much for taking this time with us. It's always a pleasure and look forward to catching up with you again. Thank you.
Likewise, Bennie. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.